30, 40 years, they want returns. And they'll sell it on. That's how the market works. They'll have it for 3 or 4 years, they'll sell it on.
So, I'm not really sure if you had gone with this because I wasn't here, but I think that there has to have the question was how to involve the stakeholders that are dependent or related to forests. In our experience and at least the way we see things from Reforestamos, it has to be a productive approach. If it's not related to how people are having an income or obtaining some kind of resource from the forest, and that's not related to reducing emissions from deforestation, then I don't think it's going to work. Because then you would enter in a dangerous dynamic maybe, where if there's no work related to the income or the the support or the subsidy or whatever that's, then the signal you're sending is don't worry, don't do anything, money will come. And that's not the kind of behavior you want to develop through this financial incentive or whatever. So I would say that would be important. And on what I've seen on the field in voluntary markets, in a project in Mexico, it's people that really associate what they're doing with the payment that they will receive. And people that wait long, this is a really small project, so people that wait 2 or 3 years to be able to enter and actually in the program and to receive this support. So, people tend to value, even if it's small money, but they relate this, their trees there or what they're doing, and, having to wait for entering it, then just, oh, you know what, you're in a REDD project now, here's, $100. And so I would say that.
Well, what we see most often is that people here, local people, can engage long-term on things that contribute to their livelihood, secure their livelihood, and add value to their existence. And things that tend to be based on morality, moral and so on, and start debating that they should do something that they don't really see the value to their livelihood. And most of the time, they establish linkages and concrete long-term dynamics when they engage people in doing activities that in the long run meet short-term and bring solutions to their life. And probably that could be a way of thinking of initiatives on the ground that bring rapid responses while building on long-term solutions that we are seeking for. It's probably one of the challenges we need to look at.
I'm not sure if my response will not confuse you, but don't get worried. I think handling issues of stakeholders, personally I would propose conducting an elaborate stakeholder analysis. And this involves identifying whom these stakeholders are, because there are very many stakeholders out there, and what stake or influence do they have in the mechanism we are trying to develop. And each of those stakes or influence, we try to devise response strategies for them. I think by the end of that, we will have, in a way, tried to handle the issue of our stakeholders. Thank you.
It's too technical to try and use a microphone. I was sharing in the break actually with any of that. We've developed a benefit sharing scheme, but it started even before REDD even was thought about, but it's really successfully working to conserve the forest in Kenya, and it just came about through a lot of lengthy community consultation. It was quite slow to start with and very small scale, but they found that the reason why people were taking forest, basically destroying the forest for charcoal production was because the one reason they needed cash was to pay for school fees for their kids. And so we started an ecotourism project, and the money, any profits from that, go into a scheme which is handed out in the form of bursaries for the school children for their fees. And that's all decided not by us, but by a committee of teachers and community leaders, and we identify the most needy families and the kids that have got the best school results. And it's working really well. There's like 200 kids in school this year. But the thing that worries me about REDD is it's happening quite fast, and it's all very top down. And how can you? I just don't see how you can do it without a lot of grassroots work.
I think just it's a lot easier to go into areas that you're already working as an NGO. So where you're already working with communities, you've already got the trust of the communities, you've got projects on the ground, not the REDD projects, but you've got projects on the ground. I think it's going to be a lot easier. So maybe there's somehow, how do you link that? How do you link up with existing projects on the ground and then come in with your REDD process? And I think that also will, listen, there's conflict in everything we do, but it will definitely reduce the conflict.
Then we can know that the school should get first benefit somehow like that. But in the same time, we have a survey, in terms of the capacity building in the REDD pass, and we found out that many of the facilitators, the implementers, did not have skill enough, in terms of the participatory approach. So that's why it's come to be like a just and have bias, and did not let the community, in the process. And I think this kind of thing, not only the implementer, even the community leaders also need to have a more capacity, in terms of, to transfer the information and the knowledge, to the other, and make them, in terms of the member or somehow like that can have understanding, so that's why they can participate more.
Just maybe a question. How this relates to the issue of trust? There, of course, there's a lot of elements to it, but how often in the engagement, in the design and stakeholder engagement, does relationship building and trust building, is that front of mind for folks aside from objectives of a larger ministry or something like that? Are there any thoughts on that in terms of, is it front of mind, or just if it happens, great, if not?
I would say the teams that are the implementation teams in the field, who are Tanzanians and Kenyans and Uganda and DRC, it's front and foremost in their mind every single day. It's what drives them every day to in the implementation process.
You need to find an opinion in a community, basically, and that's been our experience, is that in the rural landholders that we've worked with, it's basically been successfully initiated by having a well-respected member of that community advocate for the opportunity of change. And presumably that applies in communities all over the planet.
I didn't see any hands go up, so perhaps I'll have a last say before I summarise. I can summarise my first point. Actually, just thinking about that up there it does go back into the summary. I think that last question is who are the stakeholders and what's the roles of the stakeholders, and what, for example, is the role that is played by the government as an enforcer or a facilitator. I think that's a critical point, and trust is built by becoming a facilitator rather than being an enforcer. And I think that in some of the discussions, I think there was probably 4 points in that last discussion, one of them being who are the stakeholders, roles, positions, and appropriate roles. Perhaps to almost be devil's advocate to Andrew's point about field staff and it being at the forefront of their mind to build up their trust, when you can actually develop your relationship with your communities and go beyond your specific role, which then creates difficulty when other partners come in at appropriate stages. That's just being a little bit of a devil's advocate. And then there are two other things: is the time pressure and how long it takes. And it's a very extensive process. If you go back to just basic forest management and where local people are at the centre of it, Sweden has one of the best models in the world. And that took them 50, 60, 70, 80 years to get where they were. But from a very poor situation at the time when the forests were being put under different land tenure systems. Actually, Sweden had the biggest per capita rate of migration out of Europe. It was one of the poorest countries, so people can't use the argument that they were rich. But it was, was a lengthy period. And then also there's this difficulty in sending signals of what money will come, this will come, is a definite problem. But I think and two other bits I picked up was that building on other experiences and how people are building on other experiences and benefit sharing mechanisms rather than creating something new. And actually that was my first point when I summarised the last time, so perhaps we are beginning to learn to build onto something. But actually what also was quite interesting, just to sort of jump in the midterm, perhaps if we can try and challenge ourselves in this last one, is that the difficulty we're having in drilling down right into some of the benefit sharing discussions. Perhaps looking at some of those cards up there, it's still not clear what we mean by benefit sharing.
Okay, so last priority question, or challenge from the group. How to scale up from voluntary national projects to international market, or within a country for a few projects to many projects. So the issue of scale. Any insights, opportunities, experiences? The one that was voted on here is how to scale up from voluntary national projects to international market, or within a country for a few projects to many projects. So the issue of scaling up.
It's a minor point really, but it was based on the experience in Tasmania that the VCS allowed grouped projects. So there's that awareness starting to build in the voluntary market that they need to scale up. So I just thought that was it. In fact, we were the first group project in the world. So there is increasing awareness in the world.
Yeah, one of the issue of scale up is interesting. There's only a couple of ways to do it. I mean, within a company, you do a pilot project around something, and then that becomes a corporate project, and it's integrated into corporate process, and it's sort of a process approach. Standards are increasing, process guidelines, standards, standard verification processes. But the ultimate scale up is regulation and mandatory policy. But I think we're a long way away from that. I often feel with REDD Plus we're over-engineering it. I think a colleague over here made a good point. I mean, instead of some people trying to design something totally new, I mean, the issue of carbon is new, I guess. But it sits around forestry practices that already exist, and around markets for forest products that already exist, and around best practice guidelines that already exist. So I often think, you know, it's taken a long time because people are trying to engineer something from scratch, and it really should be integrating into existing good practice. That's my own view. But there's only a couple of ways to scale up. We don't need to reinvent how to scale up.
The point at which I disagree is the understanding of the amount of carbon in a particular forest system. And so the measurement challenge is new, and you see it, there are very simplistic systems in place that simply look at the amount of wood that's produced out of the forest and directly equate that to carbon. But when you look at carbon at the ecosystem level, it's quite a different story. And the sort of heterogeneity in the forest itself, in natural forest, is actually very complex to identify the amount of carbon, the avoided emissions from changing management, whether it's changing how you log a forest or changing from logging to protection or whatever it is. So that's where the complexity really lies, and in terms of the market or governments or funds having confidence about the environmental integrity, i.e. the scale of the reduced emissions, then that's fundamental to get that right. And at the moment we don't have a cost-effective way of delivering. We go out and we measure every tree, every single tree on a bit of private land. And you can't do that at a scale in the tropical forest, so you've got to have confidence in the technology that you're using, and there's lots of new technology, but all of that is still being tested, and it's so there's all this uncertainty around measurement, but I think it's a fundamental problem we really haven't raised today.
I'm going to say something that it may be really simple, but like it needs to be said. If you need to scale up, you need to work on the public policy side. I mean, if you have one small voluntary market carbon project that is working, you cannot scale up that one because it grew in particular conditions on the field. You know, and the community was like this, and there was an NGO that was working like that, and they had the spirit of conserving forests. But then when you try to build 10 projects like that, and you are out of that region, and it turns out that cows are far more attractive on that particular forest, then you're never going to have a REDD project there. And it has to do with policy alignment, and it has to do with what are the incentives of people to take down the forest, taking down the forest. So, I mean, and then it turns out that maybe you don't need REDD projects, maybe you just need to do the policy. I don't know. But it's, I mean, the thing is, this is giving us a chance to think about how public policies are influencing the forest. So I think for really scaling up, we need to think in that level.
Yeah, I think building on some of the swirling conversation that's there, we're sort of being drawn in two different directions, and I think that's exactly how change is affected, is that we identify the things that we like, and we also figure out the things that challenge us. And I think it's easy to confuse a bottom-up. When I think of bottom-up approach, I think of participatory processes, and that can be separate from a bottom-up approach to combining a bunch of overlapping and different methodologies for voluntary projects and trying to make a national system. And when I think about scaling up, I mean, I think that there's going to be a top-down portion of measurement. There's going to have to be some standardizing way of going about it. And that's the thing that people argue about 4 times a year traveling to countries that have no forest. That's the climate negotiations, and that's great. But I think that just to sort of your point, Mary and Joseph wouldn't have to travel to Jerusalem anymore to go for a census. We've developed existing science to go about sampling and to not have to measure every tree. And those challenges are particularly complex in large undisturbed forests, like the Congo Basin, like Southeast Asia. And so as we take some of those technologies, I think we need to strike a balance or find a balance between helping people understand how they fit into a bottom-up process for consultation, benefit, rights identifications, things like that, versus standardized approaches that ensure that everyone will have equal access to those benefits in a similarly measured way.
Maybe I'm just a naive optimist, but I have an idea that the policy dimension should be being taken care of through the process that is being funded in now quite a large number of countries with the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility and UN REDD program, the money that they are putting into the design of a package of measures called REDD Readiness. I don't know. I mean, sometimes it seems that that process is extremely slow and difficult. Other times you think, well, of course it is, because the first part of the agreed exercise in those design processes is a consultative process. If you look at the RPP, this famous RPP document, which I would advise that anybody who's interested in any country, particular country, you start out by looking at what's actually written in the RPP.